Hi, I'm Alan Bernstein. I'm President and CEO of CIFAR, and I'm pleased to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alan. It's a real pleasure to have you. In a recent op-ed, you wrote, and I quote, like the development of the mRNA vaccine, a Cleantech Moonshot would launch an enormous economic boom for Canada that would ease the pain of wearing off our dependency on oil and gas. Why do you think Canada needs a Cleantech Moonshot?
We need to get there, or we're in trouble. And we can see the signs of that trouble already. Look at what's happening on the west coast of North America over the last few summers, between wildfires, heat domes, etc. People are dying. People's lives are being totally disrupted. The cost of that climate change, even in Canada, who would have thought, is huge. And so the cost of a moonshot approach to clean tech, I think, is nothing compared to what we're already seeing, even in our own backyard. And so when JFK launched the Man on the Moon expedition, there wasn't a guarantee that it would work. And when we invested, and we being mostly the United States and Pfizer, when we invested as a planet on RNA vaccines, there was no guarantee that it would work, none whatsoever. That was a long shot. And I was privileged as a member of the vaccine task force to see some of the early data in animals, and it looked very encouraging. But that doesn't mean at all that it would work in humans. And so we had a lot of discussion. Well, it works in mice, doesn't mean it's going to work in humans. Absolutely true. But you have to take those risks when there's so much at stake, when there's a virus that's threatening the whole planet. And so we're in a similar situation with climate change and renewable energy. And so I think we need to take the same attitude and put the same level of money on the table to do this. Luckily, we have all the ingredients we need, both here in Canada, but also internationally, to do this. Where science is today is really remarkable. That's number one. And I think that's the most important thing. The level of sophistication and knowledge and momentum in physics and chemistry and artificial intelligence and engineering, all the things you need, I think, to come together to create a true moonshot in clean tech are there. Secondly, young people who are in those areas of science are incredibly entrepreneurial these days, and they're willing to take those risks. They understand both the stakes, and they're excited by hoping they can do something, and they feel optimistic they can do something. So if you don't have people, you don't have anything. So those young people are there, and they're willing to do it. What we need now is resources to let them loose and tackle this problem. Most of it will not work. That's a given. But the converse is we'll get a lot of incremental science, a lot of which will work, but it's only incremental. It'll make a bit of a difference, which is important, but it's not the moonshot I believe we need to really solve the climate change problem and to get to net zero by the target dates that we've set for ourselves as a species.
Alan, you listed a bunch of strengths in there. I'm wondering if you could identify maybe 2 or 3 priorities that you think we, as a whole, as a nation, as an ecosystem, have to focus on to improve our performance in clean tech and also improve our global competitiveness within that space. And then attached to that, are there key stakeholders you think have to take action on each of those priorities?
Well, I think the key word in your question, actually, Tim, is ecosystem. We're talking about innovation, and innovation always takes place in an ecosystem. And if you study innovation ecosystems, they all have a number of characteristics which I think they share. Just to list them quickly, one, of course, or not of course, but one is critical mass. You need to have a lot of startup and scale up and ideally sort of anchor tenants, large companies in that ecosystem, whether it's in high tech, artificial intelligence, clean tech, biotech. They all share those characteristics. The second part of that ecosystem, and it's the key thing, I guess, in an ecosystem, is critical mass of what? It's critical mass of companies, but it's also critical mass of people and ideas. Without people and ideas, you don't have an innovation sector, obviously, I think. I think a third thing is you need venture capital. You need knowledgeable venture capital. By knowledgeable, I mean you need investors who understand the science, who know the scientists, and therefore are making knowledgeable investments. Otherwise, everything looks risky. You're blindfolded in a dark room, and you're not going to make a lot of big steps because you don't know what's out there. And we need to make some bold steps. And I think one of the key things about clean tech, because the clock is ticking. I think the fourth thing is you need public funds. You need the public sector to be there in a couple of ways. One is, of course, to train those people and to give rise to those early stage ideas coming out of our universities. I think that, again, is a common trait of all the sort of, I'll call high tech ecosystems in innovation in every area, including clean tech. And only, I would postulate, only the governments or public funds can invest in that early stage stuff. It's too high risk for the private sector, and the private sector doesn't invest in that early stage stuff. Again, in other areas, including in clean tech, and you also need the public sector to invest in infrastructure, which is another part of that ecosystem. Uh, Innovation takes place in buildings. It takes place, if it's biotech, it needs labs. If it's clean tech, it needs some labs. If it's high tech, it needs computers and computer space, but it needs infrastructure. So you need all of that to gel together. And beyond that, you need an environment, a broader environment that suggests a high quality of life, because smart people can live anywhere. And obviously, they're going to choose to live where there's a high quality of life. And high quality of life is different for different people, but I would say for most people, it includes a safe city, an interesting city, a dynamic city, good restaurants, good schools for their children, et cetera, et cetera.
If I had to put you on the spot for a second and ask you to maybe place your chips on two or three areas or technologies that you think would be ideal for a moonshot in Canada, maybe based on our existing expertise in that space or on the outsized impact it could have on future outcomes, which two or three spaces would you identify as holding the most promise?
What I'll do here, Tim, is I'll identify, I think, some of the outstanding questions, which I think could be framed very definitely as a moonshot challenge. So the first one would be carbon capture and storage. And when I think of carbon capture and storage, what I'm thinking about in terms of moonshot is not carbon capture and storage for the oil sands. The oil sands are actually very small amount on a percentage basis of carbon release into the atmosphere and methane release into the atmosphere. We need carbon capture and storage to capture all of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, in the planet as a whole. A second one is, look, solar energy, which to me is probably going to be, but there's some problems with it, which I'll come to, the solution, if you will, to our electrification for the planet. And we should remember here in Canada that there are about 1 billion+ people on the planet who have yet to have access to reliable, safe electricity. And there are huge implications, especially for women and children. Solar energy is, the amount of sunshine that shines on the surface of the planet, somewhere on our planet, all the time is enormous. I don't have those figures in my head at the moment, but it's enormous. And it certainly is enough to power all of our electrical needs, except, of course, the sun doesn't always shine. It's nighttime half the time, or at least. in most places on average, and there's clouds, there's cloudy days. And so we need a way of developing batteries that can safely store electricity, the energy from the sun, in a safe, accessible way for those people who live in huts in Africa. Not for the grid, there is no grid in most of Africa, but for on an individual basis. I think a third thing, and I go this again still is based on solar energy, is think about the Sahara Desert. The sun almost always shines there, at least during the daytime. If we could harvest that sun and transport it under the Mediterranean Sea to Europe, we could electrify Europe. But we would lose a lot of energy in the process because it's a long distance. Or ditto all the hydroelectric power in northern Quebec. If we could electrify all of Canada or all of North America without any loss of electricity, that would be remarkable. The problem is we lose a lot of energy as we transmit electrons over large distances. So we need what's called superconductivity. We need a way of transporting electrons through large distances through material without significant loss of energy, and that's superconductivity. Um, Again, we have a program called Quantum Materials, and there's some individuals in there. Pablo Jerez Harillo from MIT has done some amazing research on using twisted graphene crystals and shown he can get very close to superconductivity in the lab with those graphene crystals. So raises lots of interesting possibilities now. Can we scale up? Are there better materials? Is this a door opening to really getting superconductivity in the real world? It's too early to say, but that's the kind of science the world needs if we're going to solve these issues.